When my ex begged me to investigate his haunted house, I thought he finally lost it. But when I saw his ghost experiments, well, I had to know the truth. And let's just say, what I found was scarier, and crazier, than anything I could have expected.
It all started when my ex, Dan, reached out after a year of silence, with a message that made me laugh and cringe at the same time. He said his house was haunted, and that he needed my help because I was the only one who'd believe him. I almost blocked him on the spot, but then he sent me these videos, grainy, shaky clips labeled ghost experiments. They looked so real. Doors slamming shut, shadows creeping along the walls, and the whispers. It was enough to give anyone chills. Against my better judgment, I agreed to help, telling myself it was just curiosity or maybe pity. I convinced myself that I was doing him a favor by humoring him. But as I drove up to his old Victorian house that night, a nagging feeling kept tugging at me. The house was creepy enough on the outside. Cracked paint, overgrown lawn, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. It all started when my ex Dan reached out after a year of silence, with a message that made me laugh and cringe at the same time. He said his house was haunted, and that he needed my help because I was the only one who'd believe him. I almost blocked him on the spot, but then he sent me these videos, grainy, shaky clips labeled ghost experiments. They looked so real. Doors slamming shut, shadows creeping along the walls, and the whispers. It was enough to give anyone chills. Against my better judgment, I agreed to help, telling myself it was just curiosity or maybe pity. I convinced myself that I was doing him a favor by humoring him. But as I drove up to his old Victorian house that night, a nagging feeling kept tugging at me. The house was creepy enough on the outside. Cracked paint, overgrown lawn, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. Dan answered the door looking exhausted, his hair a mess with deep dark circles. Unanswered the door looking exhausted, his hair a mess, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. He gave me a weak grin and led me inside, where he'd set up his so-called ghost experiments. He showed me more footage, this time with even clearer shadows moving along the walls and objects shifting around on their own. I rolled my eyes but played along, trying not to laugh. I mean, it was Dan we were talking about. If he was staging this, it wouldn't be his first elaborate prank. Still, I agreed to investigate, more to prove he was imagining things than anything else. He handed me a flashlight, and we split up to cover different parts of the house. I took the kitchen first, where everything felt eerie and silent until I heard this soft scratching sound. I froze, straining my ears. Then, out of nowhere, a spoon flew off the counter. I jumped, my heart pounding, feeling ridiculous for being scared by a kitchen utensil. Trying to shake off the jitters, I continued to check each room, calling out, "Nice try, Dan," but no one answered. When I heard a loud bang from upstairs, I ran up, thinking I'd catch him messing around, but the hallway was empty. Then, as I approached the bathroom, I noticed the mirror was fogged over, even though it had been empty and cold. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it, when I saw words slowly appear on the fogged mirror. "Leave." That was enough to send shivers down my spine. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it had to be Dan's idea of a joke, but deep down, I was starting to feel uneasy. After scouring the main floor, I headed down to the basement. I'd been in a lot of creepy places before, but this basement took the cake. Dark, damp, and filled with the smell of mildew. Then, in the far corner, I saw a faint glow. A flickering old TV, one of those ancient CRTs. As I got closer, the static on the screen shifted, and suddenly it showed an image of me standing in the basement. I spun around, but there was no camera, no one else around. I looked back, and my reflection on the screen was mouthing something. "Get out." That was enough for me. I scrambled back up the stairs, trying to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. When I found Dan, he looked as freaked out as I felt. He claimed he had no idea where that old TV had come from, and for the first time, I started to believe him. We decided to set up traps and cameras, hoping to catch whatever was causing all this. For a while, it was quiet, and I started to feel like we'd scared off whatever it was. But then, The motion alarms started blaring, first from the kitchen, then the living room, and the basement, one after the other. We checked the monitors and saw shadows flickering across the screens. Dan and I stared at each other, terrified but too stubborn to back down. The whispering returned, this time louder and clearer, with my name, Sara, echoing through the hallways. By now, I was genuinely spooked. We decided to make one last sweep, starting with the attic. There, hidden behind a stack of boxes, we found a tiny door we'd never noticed before. Inside was an old journal and a cassette player. I picked up the journal and started reading. As I turned the pages, I realized it belonged to Dan's grandmother. The entries described the same strange happenings we were experiencing now. It was like she was warning us, or maybe she'd left it behind as a twisted joke. Dan looked pale, clearly shocked. He had no idea his grandmother had gone through any of this. But then we heard it. The faint, scratchy tune of an old jazz song coming from the cassette player. The music was strangely upbeat, out of place in the eerie silence of the attic. Then a woman's voice, Dan's grandmother, spoke over the music. "Congratulations, dear, you found my little secret." We both froze. She went on to explain, laughing about how she'd always loved a good prank, leaving clues behind to spook anyone who dared live in the house after her. It was such a twisted, oddly endearing revelation. We laughed, relieved, thinking it was all over, that we'd just been victims of a ghost with a sense of humor. But as we turned to leave, the cassette player stopped, and the room fell silent.